The station doors swing open, and a scarred dog drags in the one clue a missing girl has left behind. What he makes them follow will lead straight into an underground nightmare. The night at Oak Ridge Fire Station 7 was heavy with quiet, the kind of silence that comes only after a long day, when the engines are washed and parked, the radios are calm, and the men are leaning back in their chairs with coffee cooling in their hands. The hum of the vending machine and the soft ticking of the clock were the only sounds. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist that clung to the windows, and the smell of damp asphalt hung in the air. No one expected anything unusual, not at this hour, not on this night. Then the doors at the front of the station creaked open, not with the lazy push of a breeze, but with the suddenness of something desperate. The firefighters looked up, brows furrowed, and what they saw stole the breath from their lungs. Through the doorway limped a German shepherd, mud caked thick across his legs and belly, his coat streaked with blood that was not all his own. His breathing came in short bursts, sides heaving as though he had run across the edge of the world just to get here. But it wasn't the sight of his battered body that froze the men in their seats. It was what he carried, hanging from his jaws, clenched between teeth worn from age and struggle, was a single child's sneaker. The shoe was pink once, though mud and blood had hidden most of its color. The sole was scuffed nearly flat, the laces torn and dangling, and on its side was a streak of red that no one mistook for paint. For a moment, the firehouse was as silent as a grave. Coffee cups were set down with trembling hands. One of the men whispered a curse under his breath, and another crossed himself without even realizing he had done it. The shepherd's eyes burned amber in the dim light, not wild, not afraid, but pleading. His paws left smears on the linoleum as he stepped forward, each movement stiff and deliberate, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. Still, he held the shoe as if it were a sacred thing, as if letting go would mean losing everything. Lieutenant Cole was the first to rise. He was a man used to chaos, used to flames and wreckage and screams in the dark. But the sight of the dog stopped him cold. He bent slowly, palms open, and spoke in a low, steady tone, the way one might speak to a child or a soldier too wounded to stand. The shepherd gave a weak snarl, not out of hatred but warning, teeth flashing white in the fluorescent glow. Even on the brink of collapse, he was still guarding whatever truth he had carried through the rain. The others gathered close now, boots scraping against the floor, the weight of the moment pressing in on them all. They knew what that shoe meant. It was too small for the dog, too stained to belong to anything but fear. Somewhere a child was missing. Somewhere the night was still alive with danger. And this dog had run through hell to bring the first clue to their door. The men stared at the shepherd, hearts pounding. As the old clock ticked on, the firehouse would never feel quiet again. Lieutenant Cole reached down and lifted the sneaker from the floor, his hands steady but his eyes sharp as they traced the dried smear of blood across the fabric. It was small, far too small for anyone in the firehouse, the kind of shoe a little girl might wear on the first day of school. His stomach twisted, and he didn't need to speak for the others to understand what he was thinking. He grabbed the radio from his belt and called dispatch, his voice clipped and urgent, reporting a possible missing child and a piece of evidence delivered under the strangest of circumstances. While he spoke, the German shepherd lowered his head and growled, a sound deep and raw, his teeth flashing as if to say the shoe was not to be taken from him. Cole eased his hand back, setting the sneaker on the counter where everyone could see it, then lifted both palms in surrender. The dog paced to the station doors and back again, his nails clicking on the linoleum, his eyes glowing with a restless fire that none of the men could ignore. He would stop at the door, press his nose against the crack, then turn and bark low, a sound that made the hair on their arms rise. It was not the bark of an animal asking for food or attention. It was the command of something that had seen too much and carried too much to let the night go quiet. One of the younger firefighters, Morales, whispered that maybe he was just a stray. Maybe he had stolen the shoe somewhere. but the others shook their heads. There was purpose in the shepherd's every move, a weight in his stare that was impossible to dismiss. Cole knelt to eye level with him, studying the scars along the dog's flank, the patch of missing fur near his shoulder, the way his muscles quivered but did not fold. This was no pet wandering off the street. This was a soldier of some kind, battered but unbroken, carrying a message in the only way he knew how. The dog barked once more, louder now, spinning in a tight circle before darting back to the door, his body trembling with urgency. Cole rose to his feet, his decision already made. "Gear up," he ordered, his voice hard as steel. The men hesitated only a moment before grabbing jackets and radios. None of them said it out loud, but they all felt the same thing. They were being asked to follow, and if they ignored the call, something far worse than regret would haunt them. As the shepherd shoved his weight against the firehouse doors, the men realized the truth. This was not a stray limping in by chance. This was a messenger sent through the rain and mud, carrying the sign of a child in danger, carrying proof in his teeth and fury in his heart. The firehouse lights flickered, boots thudded against the floor, and with every breath, the dog seemed to say the same words over and over without speaking. "Follow me now." The television in the corner of the firehouse had been on mute all evening, flickering through the local news and weather reports without anyone paying much attention. Now, with the battered sneaker lying on the counter, and the shepherd still pacing like a storm contained in fur and muscle, Lieutenant Cole reached for the remote and turned up the volume. The room filled with the voice of the anchor, calm but carrying an undertone of urgency. A 12-year-old girl named Lily Harrow had been missing for 48 hours. The screen showed her school photo, a sweet face framed by dark hair, eyes that still held the easy trust of childhood. She had last been seen walking home from her friend's house on the edge of town. She never arrived. Search parties had been organized, volunteers combed the woods, and the sheriff had called in state police. Her mother had begged on camera, voice breaking, for anyone who saw anything to come forward. The anchor mentioned one detail that made every man in the firehouse freeze. The girl had been wearing pink sneakers with white laces the day she disappeared. Cole looked at the shoe again, his hand resting on the counter beside it, and he felt the weight of the truth settle like iron in his chest. The shepherd had not wandered in by chance. He had carried this here for a reason. Cole swallowed, his throat dry, and without a word the rest of the crew gathered around, each man staring at the screen and then back at the dog. The shepherd made no move toward the food dish Morales had set out, and he ignored the bowl of water pushed gently in front of him. Instead, he turned his head to the door again and let out a low bark, sharp and impatient, before scratching at the wood with his paw. The sound was harsh against the quiet, claws dragging down paint, desperate and relentless. He barked again, louder now, eyes flashing back at Cole, as if to say every second wasted was a second too long. Cole tried to calm him, stepping forward, speaking in that steady tone again. But the dog did not settle. He pawed harder, muscles straining, body pressed toward the way out, as if the walls themselves were a cage he could not stand. When one of the men tried to hold his collar, the shepherd snapped, not to harm but to warn, teeth bared, growl echoing like thunder in the tight space. It was clear, now he would not stop until they followed. Cole exhaled, feeling the decision tighten his chest, then nodded once. He lifted the radio to his mouth and told dispatch they had a lead, unconfirmed but urgent. His voice was low but firm, carrying the kind of weight only a man certain of his duty could carry. The others stood ready, waiting for his word. The shepherd stopped scratching long enough to look back at him, amber eyes locked, waiting for the only answer that mattered. Cole gave a grim smile and reached for his coat. "All right," he said, voice steady as the storm outside. "We follow." The fire engine rolled out of the station slower than usual, its lights dark, its siren silent. The only sound was the rumble of the engine and the soft patter of rain on the roof. Ahead of them, the German shepherd limped down the street, his body battered, his paws leaving faint streaks of blood on the wet pavement. Every few steps he stumbled, but he never stopped. His head low, his ears fixed forward, his purpose burning through the pain. Lieutenant Cole leaned forward in the passenger seat. Eyes narrowed as he watched the dog move, steady as a compass needle pointing north. The crew inside the engine spoke little. Each man knew this was not like any call they had ever answered. Fires were loud and bright, accidents were chaotic and sharp, but this was different. This was a chase into the unknown, guided not by alarms or dispatch, but by a wounded dog who carried the weight of a missing child in his jaws. The engine crawled behind him through the dark streets until he turned off toward the back roads, slipping into the woods where the pavement ended and the real test began. The tires crunched on gravel, then slipped over patches of mud. Cole motioned for the driver to kill the headlights. The world outside turned black except for the pale glow of the moon, broken by the branches of pines overhead. The shepherd pressed forward, his fur shining wet, his tail low but moving with urgency. When the road narrowed to little more than a trail, the men exchanged glances. The engine could go no further. Cole opened the door and stepped out into the cold air, boots sinking into the mud, rain misting across his face. The others followed with flashlights, but Cole shook his head. No beams, no noise. If this dog could track without sight, then so could they. The shepherd led them into the trees, over a shallow creek that soaked their boots, through brush that tore at their sleeves. He never once looked back to see if they were coming. He simply knew they would. His paws bled freely now, leaving red smudges on the rocks, but his body moved with a rhythm beyond pain, driven by something older than words. He wove down an old logging road, half swallowed by moss and fallen branches. The men stumbled, cursing under their breath, but each time they thought to stop, they saw him ahead, a shadow of determination, and their doubts fell silent. Cole felt the ground tilt as the dog brought them deeper, into places even hunters rarely tread. His heart pounded not from the climb, but from the sense that they were being pulled toward something hidden, something that wanted to stay hidden. The shepherd slowed at times, nose pressed to the earth, then surged forward again, as if chasing echoes only he could hear. Hours passed, though none of them spoke of the time. The night seemed endless, the forest endless too, until finally the dog halted at a clearing. He stood trembling, chest heaving, eyes locked on a shape ahead. The men lifted their gaze and saw it too, the outline of an old shack leaning against the trees, its roof caved, its door hanging loose. The shepherd barked once, sharp and certain, then stepped aside. He had brought them here, and whatever waited inside was the reason he would not rest. The shack stood crooked in the clearing like a skeleton of wood and rust, its roof sagging, its windows broken, its door barely hanging from one hinge. The air smelled of damp leaves and rot, but beneath it all was something sharper, something that made the men tense before they even stepped inside. The German shepherd padded forward first, his paws dragging slightly, but his body still alive with urgency. He sniffed the threshold, growled low in his throat, then pressed through the broken doorframe without waiting for them to follow. Lieutenant Cole lifted a hand, signaling the others to move carefully. Their boots crunched on the warped floorboards, flashlights sweeping across the dark interior. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Cobwebs clung to the corners. It looked like no one had lived there in years, but the silence felt too heavy, too recent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then Morales let out a sharp curse and pointed his beam at the floor. There, lying in the corner near a collapsed chair, was a backpack. The color had faded under dirt and grime, but the patches sewn on its surface were still visible, one shaped like a heart, another like a star. Cole knelt slowly and touched it, his throat tightening. The zipper was broken, one strap nearly torn off. He turned it over and saw the initials written in careful marker on the inside flap. L.H. Lily Harrow. The shepherd gave a sharp bark that echoed off the walls. He had already moved to the center of the shack. nose pressed hard to the floorboards. His body shook with a growl that seemed to rise from his very bones. Cole followed his gaze, and his stomach dropped. There, in the dim light, the boards were stained dark brown. A pool of dried blood had soaked deep into the wood, old enough to crust but not so old that it could be dismissed. The men exchanged grim looks, no words passing between them, each one knowing what this meant. The dog's growl deepened as he traced the edge of the stain to the far side of the room, where a square outline in the floor revealed a trapdoor. The rusted handle jutted up, covered in dust. The shepherd pressed his muzzle to the crack, sniffing hard, then jerked back with a snarl. His teeth flashed, his hackles lifted, his entire body stiffened like a bowstring drawn tight. He didn't just sense it. He knew there was something down there. Cole reached for the handle but paused, the air in the shack growing colder with the weight of their realization. They weren't chasing shadows anymore. They were here, standing above the place where the trail ended, where the girl had been brought. He looked at the shepherd, saw the fire still burning in those amber eyes, and felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. The men backed away from the cellar door, weapons in hand, hearts hammering. The dog stayed pressed against the boards, growl rolling like distant thunder. They didn't need to say it out loud. They were close, far closer than any of them were ready for, and the night was about to break open. The trapdoor seemed to breathe in the silence, every man frozen around it, their hearts heavy with the thought of what might be waiting below. The shepherd had not moved from his place, his nose pressed close, his body rigid with warning. Cole was about to give the order to pry it open when the night split apart with the crack of gunfire. Bullets tore through the wooden walls, splinters raining down, the sound so sudden and violent it felt like the world itself had erupted. The men dove for cover, instinct honed by years of training in fire and chaos. But nothing had prepared them for this. Out of the tree-lined shadows moved fast and hard, men in masks and heavy boots rushing forward with rifles raised. Their faces were hidden, their voices sharp and cruel as they barked orders to one another. The firefighters had nothing but radios on their belts and axes in their hands, tools meant for flames, not gunmen. Cole shouted for them to hold their ground, his voice steady even as his heart pounded. He grabbed his radio and called for immediate backup, his words fast and clipped, his breath harsh in the receiver. Shots echoed all around, the shack shaking under the onslaught, the boards groaning as if the building itself might collapse. The shepherd launched before anyone else could move. His body was a blur of muscle and fury, teeth bared, a snarl ripping from his throat as he shot out of the shack like a bullet of his own. He leapt at the first masked man who crossed the threshold, slamming into him with such force that the rifle clattered to the floor. The man cried out, stumbling backward, his arm tearing under the dog's jaws. The others opened fire, the blasts deafening, flashes of light ripping through the dark. But the shepherd did not flinch. He darted, he weaved, his growls filling the night like thunder rolling through the forest. Cole shouted for his men to spread out, to use their axes as shields if nothing else, to keep the attackers at bay until help arrived. He could hear dispatch in his ear, officers en route, sirens already wailing from town, but minutes felt like hours when every heartbeat carried the risk of death. Morales hurled his axe like a spear, catching one gunman across the shoulder, sending him staggering back into the trees. Another firefighter swung with all his strength, knocking a rifle aside just before the trigger could pull. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they refused to run. The shepherd took a blow then, a rifle butt to his ribs that sent him crashing into the dirt. He staggered but did not fall. Blood slicked his flank, his paws trembling, yet he snarled and lunged again, driving the enemy back with nothing but his will. Cole saw him and felt his chest tighten with both fear and awe. The dog was buying them time, drawing the fire away from the unarmed men, sacrificing himself so that they could live. The gunfire did not stop, the night alive with violence, but above it all was the sound of sirens growing louder, closer, tearing through the dark like salvation itself. Cole clutched his radio, shouting coordinates, begging them to hurry. The shepherd barked once, sharp and defiant, before vanishing into the shadows again. The firefight seemed endless, the air thick with smoke and gunpowder, the shack trembling with every shot. The men had spread out, using what little cover they could find, their axes raised, not as weapons of war, but as desperate shields. The shepherd darted through the fray like a ghost of muscle and fire, his growls cutting through the noise, his body weaving between bullets with impossible instinct. Then, at last, one of the attackers faltered. Morales swung his axe with precision, knocking the rifle from the man's grip and driving him to the ground. Two firefighters piled onto him, pinning his arms, holding him down with all their weight, while he thrashed and cursed. Cole dropped to his knees beside the masked figure, ripping the cloth from his face. The man's eyes burned with rage, sweat pouring down his temple, teeth clenched like iron. Cole pressed his arm to the ground, his voice sharp as he demanded to know where the girl was. For a moment the man only spat, blood on his lip and venom in his stare. Then he grinned, a twisted thing that froze Cole's blood cold. Through gritted teeth he hissed the words that cut sharper than any blade. "She won't last the night." The firehouse crew went still, each man hearing it, each one struck by the finality in his tone. Morales swore under his breath, the sound trembling with fury. Cole leaned in closer, rage sparking in his chest, but the man refused to say more. He writhed, he laughed bitterly, and then went silent, jaw locked tight. The truth had been spoken, cruel and raw, and there was no more to be gained from him. The shepherd emerged from the shadows then, limping, his sides streaked with blood, his eyes still glowing with purpose. In his jaws he carried the same battered sneaker, its laces now darker, its fabric nearly soaked through. He padded toward the center of the shack, where Lily's torn backpack still lay in the dirt. With a deliberate motion he set the shoe down on top of it, his nose pressing against the initials scrawled inside the flap. The act was quiet, almost reverent, as though he was saying, "Here is the truth, here is the proof. Look at what I've brought you." Cole stared, the meaning clear as daylight. This was no animal stumbling on scraps, no random trick of instinct. The shepherd was building the story piece by piece, laying out the evidence with the precision of a trained investigator. His message was simple and undeniable. Lily Harrow had been here. She was still alive, and she needed them now more than ever. Before Cole could move, the shepherd turned sharply, ears twitching toward the tree line. His muscles tensed, his body quivered with urgency, and then he bolted. Out the door, into the night, his paws thudding against the earth with renewed fury. The men called after him, but he didn't slow, didn't glance back. He vanished into the woods, as if the darkness itself had swallowed him. Cole rose to his feet, chest heaving, watching the space where the dog had gone. His gut told him what the others already knew. The shepherd wasn't finished. He wasn't running away. He was leading them still, chasing the trail deeper, carrying the mission forward in a way no man could. The fight at the shack was over, but the hunt was not. The roar of engines cut through the forest as police units finally reached the clearing. Their headlights cast harsh beams across the shack, flashing against shattered wood and masked men bound in the dirt. Officers spilled out of cruisers with rifles raised, voices barking commands, handcuffs snapping shut. For a moment the firefighters allowed themselves to breathe, though their nerves still rattled from the fight. Lieutenant Cole met the sheriff's eyes and gave the only direction that mattered: follow the dog. The German shepherd had vanished into the trees minutes before, carrying nothing but determination and his own wounds. Cole pointed to the shoe and the backpack left together on the shack floor, proof enough that the girl was still alive. The sheriff gave a single nod and ordered half the force into the woods. Flashlights swung, radios crackled, boots pounded across the earth. The trail was faint at first, but then one of the deputies crouched low, shining his light across a patch of damp leaves. Dark streaks glistened there, not fresh enough to shine red, but unmistakable. Blood. Cole knelt beside it, pressing his palm to the ground. The streaks continued forward in uneven smears, each one spaced by paw prints pressed deep into the soil. His chest tightened as he realized what the signs meant. The blood was not from Lily. It was the shepherd's, dripping from a body that had already given more than it should. Still the tracks carried on, straight and unbroken, pulling them deeper into the woods. The officers followed in silence, every man aware of the weight behind each step. The trail crossed a shallow creek, where droplets swirled away with the current, staining the water pink. It cut through thickets of brush, where tufts of fur snagged against thorns. The shepherd was pushing himself far past the point of endurance, his body unraveling even as his will dragged him forward. Each mark in the mud was not just a sign of where he had gone, but a declaration that he would not stop until the girl was found. The forest thinned at last, giving way to open ground. The moon slid from behind the clouds, silver light washing over a jagged stretch of land scarred by time. Ahead loomed the rusted fence of an old quarry, barbed wire curling like teeth along its top, warning signs long since faded. The place smelled of dust and iron, the memory of stone once torn from the earth still lingering in the air. The shepherd's trail led directly to the gate, his paw prints pressed into the dirt like a map no one could misread. Cole stepped closer, running his hand along the wire, feeling the sharp bite of rusted barbs. Beyond the fence the quarry yawned open, a pit of darkness swallowing moonlight, a place forgotten by most and feared by the rest. The men tightened their grips on their weapons, their hearts heavy with dread. The shepherd had brought them here, bleeding, relentless, certain. Somewhere inside that pit of shadows was Lily, and the dog, wounded but unbroken, was already ahead, waiting for them to follow. The quarry loomed like a scar in the land, its cliffs jagged, its pit yawning wide and empty under the pale wash of the moon. The fence was cut in one corner, wire bent outward, as if something or someone had passed through not long ago. The shepherd pressed his nose to the ground, his body trembling from blood loss, but his will unshaken. He barked once, sharp and urgent, then pushed his body through the gap in the fence and limped ahead. Cole signaled for the others to follow, and they slipped into the hollow of earth behind him. Down a narrow slope, half hidden by weeds and broken boards, they found it. A black mouth in the rock, no larger than a doorway, leading into the ground. The shepherd did not hesitate. He squeezed through, his shoulders scraping stone, his claws scratching against the rock as his bark echoed into the void. Cole swallowed hard, the sound rolling back to him like a challenge. He dropped to his knees, flashlight in hand, and crawled after the dog, the rest of the rescuers tight on his heels. The tunnel swallowed them quickly. The air was heavy, damp, every breath coated with the stench of mold and stagnant water. Underneath it lingered diesel fumes, sharp and choking, and something worse still, something sour and metallic that clung to the back of their throats. It smelled like blood and fear, and it made the hair rise on every man's neck. Their lights cut thin beams through the darkness, glinting off rusted pipes and jagged stone. The shepherd's shadow leapt ahead of them, barking furiously as his paws carried him deeper. The passage twisted like a snake, narrowing so much they had to crawl on hands and knees, their radios crackling against the low ceiling. Water dripped steadily from above, the sound like a ticking clock, each drop echoing too loudly in the confined space. Cole's chest tightened, not just from the squeeze of stone, but from the weight of knowing they were crawling into the heart of something evil. Every mark on the walls, every scrape of metal against rock, told him this place had been used, maybe for months, maybe years. The shepherd paused at a fork where the tunnel split in two directions. He lowered his head, sniffed deep, then growled and chose the path to the left. His tail was stiff, his body rigid, his bark low and guttural, as if warning of danger just beyond their reach. Cole nodded to the men, and they followed, their flashlights trembling in their hands. As the air grew colder, the sound of chains clinking carried faintly through the stone. The men froze, their hearts pounding. The shepherd let out a sharp, furious bark and charged forward, dragging his wounded body with a strength that should have been gone hours ago. Cole surged after him, the tunnel widening enough now for them to crouch and run. The smell grew stronger, unbearable, and the sound of whimpering reached their ears. They exchanged quick glances, no words spoken. The shepherd barked again, his voice echoing like a promise through the darkness. Whatever waited at the end of this tunnel, they were close enough to touch it, and they knew now they were not alone underground. The tunnel opened into a low chamber, the ceiling dripping with water that fell in slow, cold drops onto the uneven floor. The beam of Cole's flashlight swept across stone and dirt until it landed on a shape curled against the far wall. For a heartbeat, none of them breathed, afraid it might vanish if they blinked. Then the shape stirred, a small hand lifting weakly, and a hoarse voice rasped through the dark. "Help!" They rushed forward, but the shepherd was already there. He slid across the wet floor, his claws scraping rock, his whole body pressing against the girl chained to the wall. Lily Harrow's face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears, her lips cracked from thirst, but her eyes still held life. She reached trembling fingers into the shepherd's fur, clutching him as if he were the only real thing in the world. He nudged her cheek, whining low, his chest rumbling with a sound that was both comfort and apology. Cole dropped to his knees beside her, working quickly at the chains that bound her wrists. His hands shook, the metal cold and rusted, but determination steadied him. The other men spread out, scanning every shadow, their lights cutting across the chamber for signs of movement. But in that moment, all Cole saw was the girl and the dog pressed together like two lost souls finally found. Lily coughed, her voice faint, but when she spoke the words cut through the noise of dripping water and rattling chains. "I knew you'd come." She turned her head to the shepherd, her tears streaking down through the grime. "I knew it." The dog leaned harder against her, his fur brushing her skin, his amber eyes never leaving her face. When the last shackle clattered to the floor, Lily sagged forward, too weak to stand on her own. The shepherd moved instantly, bracing his body against hers, steadying her with a patience that no human could have taught. He eased her down gently, then turned his head and picked up the bloody sneaker from where it had been clamped in his jaws for miles. With quiet finality he laid it at her knees, the pink fabric torn, the laces soaked, a grim but undeniable proof. Cole's throat tightened as he watched Lily's hand fall on the shoe. She nodded slowly, her voice breaking. "It's mine." Then her face crumpled, and she buried her forehead in the shepherd's neck, sobbing quietly as the dog let out a low, soft whine. He licked her cheek once, a simple promise that she was safe now, that he would not leave again. The chamber filled with the sound of footsteps as more officers poured into the tunnels, radios buzzing, commands shouted. But none of it mattered in that moment. In the middle of that damp hollow, a girl who had been lost was found, alive and breathing, wrapped in the warmth of the only guardian who had never given up on her. The shepherd pressed his head against her ribs and closed his eyes, as if he too finally believed she was safe. The chamber was still echoing with the sound of Lily's chains falling when the first shot rang out. It struck the stone wall and shattered sparks into the dark, the crack so sharp it sent every man diving to the ground. Lily screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the shepherd's bark, a roar of defiance that filled the underground like thunder. From the tunnel behind them came the stomping of boots, heavy and fast, the gunmen returning with vengeance in their steps. Cole threw himself in front of Lily, raising his flashlight like a shield, but the shepherd was faster. The dog shoved his way between her and the storm, his body pressed tight against her trembling frame, his teeth bared in a snarl that promised violence. The next shot tore through the air and hit him across the flank, his body jerking with the impact. He didn't fall. He didn't even whimper. He held his ground, standing tall in front of her, his legs shaking but his eyes burning. The firefighters returned what little fight they could, axes swinging against rifles, radios crackling with desperate calls for backup. Cole shouted into the receiver, his voice hoarse, demanding SWAT's exact location, praying the words would carry fast enough. The tunnel lit with muzzle flashes, each one turning the chamber into a strobe of chaos. Smoke filled the air, choking, thick, mixing with the smell of stone and blood. Lily pressed herself against the wall, her small hands clutched tight around the shepherd's fur, her tears streaking down her dirt-stained cheeks. The dog growled again, low and guttural, his body refusing to collapse, though the blood poured from his wound. Every time the attackers surged forward, he lunged, snapping, driving them back with nothing but his will. His loyalty was a shield, his devotion a weapon, his body the wall between a child and the bullets meant to end her life. Cole felt a tear burn down his cheek as he swung his axe into another rifle, knocking it aside. He had seen bravery in men, but never in anything like this. Then came the roar of more boots, heavier, sharper, coordinated. From the tunnels ahead stormed the SWAT team, black uniforms melting into the shadows, rifles raised with precision. Commands erupted, short and hard, and within seconds the chamber filled with the deafening percussion of controlled fire. The gunmen shouted, panicked, and one by one fell to the ground. The tunnel rang with silence again, broken only by the hiss of radios and the ragged breathing of men who had been too close to death. Cole knelt at Lily's side, his arms reaching to lift her, but she clung to the shepherd, shaking her head. "Not without him," she whispered, her voice raw but steady. Cole's throat tightened. The dog staggered then, his legs finally giving, his body crumpling into her lap. His breath came in shallow bursts, eyes half closed, his blood soaking into the dirt. He was still alive, but barely. The SWAT medic rushed forward, lifting Lily carefully into strong arms. She cried out for the dog, her hands reaching back, but Cole pressed her close and whispered that he would follow, that they would not leave him behind. The shepherd lay motionless now, his chest rising only faintly, but his eyes cracked open one last time to watch her carried out of the dark. His tail twitched once, a silent farewell, before his head sank into the stone. The days that followed blurred into a haze of hospital visits, police reports, and headlines that carried the story from one end of the state to the other. Lily was safe. Her wounds were shallow, but her spirit had been shaken to the core. Through every hour of recovery, one figure never left her side. The German shepherd lay on the floor of her hospital room, his flank wrapped in thick white bandages, his breaths shallow but steady. Nurses tried to move him once, but his growl had been soft and stubborn, and no one argued after that. He had earned his place. Every time Lily woke from nightmares, she reached for his fur, and every time his tail tapped faintly against the tile in reply. When at last he was well enough to be moved, the firefighters insisted he return to the station. They said he belonged there now, that the firehouse was no longer just for men, but for the dog who had bled on its floors and led them through darkness. So they cleaned the engine bay, polished the floor until it shone, and set out rows of folding chairs. Word spread quickly, and by the afternoon the station was filled with people, neighbors, reporters, officers, and families who had prayed during the long search. Lily sat in the front row, her legs swinging nervously, her small hands resting on the shepherd's back. His coat was dull from exhaustion, his ears patched with shaved spots where stitches held his skin together, but his eyes were still fierce. He sat upright beside her, his body tired, but his head lifted with the dignity of a soldier who had nothing left to prove. The murmurs of the crowd fell to silence when the fire chief stepped forward. The chief held a small box in his weathered hands. He cleared his throat, his voice breaking once before he steadied it. He spoke of bravery, of the kind that doesn't come from training or command, but from instinct, from loyalty, from a refusal to surrender even when the world asks you to. He said the shepherd had shown them all what it meant to run toward danger, not away from it, to guard life with everything you have, even when you stand alone. From the box, the chief lifted a gleaming badge fixed to a leather strap. The words engraved on it caught the light, so that everyone could see. Honorary firefighter, always faithful. The room was silent as he bent and fastened it gently around the shepherd's neck. The dog didn't move, but his ears flicked, and his tail swept once across the floor like a quiet acceptance. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and voices whispered miracle. But Lily only leaned close, her cheek pressed to the dog's shoulder, and said the words that mattered most. "He saved me." Her voice was simple, steady, truer than any headline. The station didn't feel like just bricks and engines anymore. It felt like something larger, a place where courage had been carried in the jaws of a scarred dog who refused to quit. A place where hope had arrived on 4 bleeding paws and never once let go. Thank you for watching this video of a dog's devotion. If you liked this story, show your support with a like. And join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.